The champagne cork popped like a gunshot, echoing off the mahogany walls. I gripped my pen, waiting for the contract that would finally validate 10 years of sleepless nights. My father didn't slide the paper toward me. Instead, he looked at my younger brother Michael, who was already loosening his tie. "We're giving the equity to Michael," Dad said. "Now get out. You're fired." I stared. "So you sold my code?" Mom laughed, swirling her drink. "We sold our company." The FBI agent in the corner stood up. "Actually." The word hung in the air, heavy and sharp. This man had been sitting in the shadows for hours. Introduced only as a compliance auditor from the buying firm. He wore a gray suit that looked too cheap for a $1 billion merger. And his eyes hadn't left the projection screen. Dad waved a dismissive hand at him, clearly annoyed that the hired help was speaking out of turn. "Sit down, Mr. Miller," my father snapped. "This is a private family matter." Miller didn't sit. Michael laughed, a wet, nervous sound that grated against my nerves. He leaned back in the leather chair, propping his feet up on the table right next to my unassigned contract. "Yeah, buddy?" Michael sneered at me. "Pack up your nerd gear. The real businessmen are talking now." I looked at my hands, the knuckles white. I had built the Chimera Protocol from scratch, while Michael was betting on horses. They thought the code lived in the servers. They forgot it lived in my blood. Mr. Miller walked to the head of the table, his movements precise and predatory. He placed a thin manila folder on top of the glossy merger documents. "I am afraid there seems to be a confusion regarding the nature of this transaction," he said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "I don't work for Omnicorp. I've never worked for Omnicorp." My mother stopped laughing. The glass froze halfway to her lips. Miller opened his jacket, revealing the badge clipped to his belt. It caught the light, gleaming silver. "I am with the Federal Bureau of Investigation, Financial Crimes Division," Miller announced. He looked directly at my father, then at Michael. "We've been tracking a series of wire transfers initiated in anticipation of this sale. It appears you are attempting to sell assets you don't legally own." The room temperature seemed to drop 20 degrees in a second. Dad's face went from flush with victory to a pale, sickly gray. He looked at me, his eyes wide, finally realizing that the mechanic was the only thing holding the engine together. I stood up slowly, the leather of my chair creaking in the silence. My father started stammering excuses, words tumbling out in a desperate, incoherent pile. Michael looked like he was about to vomit on his expensive shoes. Miller pulled handcuffs from his belt, the metal clinking softly. I didn't wait to see them snap shut. I turned my back on the family legacy and walked toward the door. The room went silent, but my father was too arrogant to hear the handcuffs rattling in the future. The elevator ride down was a silent vacuum. I watched the floor numbers tick downward, each illuminated digit stripping away another layer of the anxiety that had choked me for a decade. Agent Miller had given me a subtle, almost imperceptible nod. Before I turned my back, a silent instruction to let the crime finish itself. I walked through the glass lobby doors and into the humid city air. The security guard, old Mr. Henderson, didn't even look up from his phone. I was already a ghost to them. My badge didn't even work on the turnstile exit. I sat in my sedan, the leather steering wheel cold against my sweating palms. My phone buzzed violently on the passenger seat, but I ignored the caller ID flashing my mother's name. They thought firing me severed the connection. They believed the company server was a physical vault they could just change the locks on. But the Chimera Protocol wasn't built on passwords or keycards. It was built on a signature, specifically mine. I pulled my laptop from my bag and tethered it to the car's hotspot. The screen glowed blue, a beacon of imminent retaliation. The terminal window opened with a blinking green cursor. I logged in using the backdoor root access I had coded during the initial build, a secret failsafe for catastrophic system failure. The logs were scrolling so fast they blurred. Someone was frantically trying to rewrite the admin privileges. It had to be Michael. He was clumsy, leaving digital fingerprints everywhere like a burglar smashing windows, instead of picking the lock. He was trying to brute force the encryption on the source code repository. I watched his attempts fail, one after another, a rhythm of pure incompetence. A red warning banner flashed across my screen. He had authorized a hard override, likely using Dad's master executive key. It wouldn't grant him ownership, but it could corrupt the delicate architecture of the neural net. I couldn't let them destroy my life's work, just to sell the scrap metal to Omnicorp. My fingers flew across the keyboard, executing the lockout sequence. I didn't want to shut them out completely, though. That would be too suspicious. I needed them to believe they had won. I needed them to feel safe before the floor dropped out. I typed the command for the sandbox protocol. It was a mirror environment I used for beta testing. A hollow shell that looked exactly like the live system, but connected to absolutely nothing. I routed their access request into the simulation. On their end, the screens would turn green. They would see the asset library, the user data, and the valuation metrics. They would think they held the keys to the kingdom. In reality, they were holding a joystick that wasn't plugged in. The upload bar hit 100%. The frantic scrolling on the terminal slowed to a halt. Michael had stopped banging on the door because he thought he was inside the house. A notification popped up on my screen: external user connected, admin M. Vance. I closed the laptop with a satisfying snap. The engine of my car roared to life, masking the pounding of my heart. They wanted a show for the investors on Monday. I would give them one. They thought they bought a Ferrari engine, but I just swapped it for a hamster wheel. The espresso machine hissed, drowning out the murmurs of the morning rush. I sat in the corner of a nondescript cafe, my iPad propped against a napkin holder. On the screen, the Omnicorp logo spun in high definition, projected onto the stage. My father stood at the podium, looking regal in a suit that cost more than my car. He was smiling, that practiced shark-like grin he used on investors. It was the smile of a man who thought he had gotten away with murder. And now, my father announced, his voice booming, the architect of our future, Michael Vance. Michael jogged onto the stage, waving to applause he hadn't earned. He wore a black turtleneck, a transparent attempt to mimic a tech visionary. But he just looked like a nervous waiter. He tapped the sleek console on the podium. I took a sip of my black coffee. It was bitter, but not nearly as bitter as watching my brother steal my identity. Today, we don't just migrate data, Michael recited, reading from a teleprompter. We migrate the soul of enterprise. He pressed the large enter key with theatrical flair. The massive screen behind him shifted from the logo to the Chimera interface. A progress bar appeared, filling rapidly with green light. The investors in the front row leaned forward, their eyes reflecting the glow of $1 billion promise. I checked the timestamp on my laptop. The sandbox simulation was running perfectly on schedule. The progress bar hit 99% installed. Michael kept smiling, holding his pose for the cameras, but I saw the slight twitch in his jaw. The spinning wheel icon appeared, rotating hypnotically. 5 seconds passed. Then 10. The silence in the auditorium grew heavy. Michael tapped the screen, then hit the key again. Nothing happened. The wheel just kept spinning. A digital purgatory I had designed specifically for this moment. His confident mask began to crack. My father stepped back into the frame, placing a hand on Michael's shoulder. Just a minor connectivity issue. Dad lied smoothly, though sweat beaded on his forehead. Then, the auditorium is overwhelmed by your enthusiasm. A few nervous chuckles rippled through the crowd, but the Omnicorp executives didn't laugh. The lead buyer crossed his arms, his face darkening. He wasn't looking at the screen anymore. He was looking at my father with the cold calculation of a predator smelling blood. Then the spinning wheel vanished. The screen didn't show the dashboard they expected. Instead, a red box dominated the display, large enough for the back row to read. The text was crisp and unforgiving. Critical error ligustul at ion. UMRJ starred USER decatide. A gasp went through the room. Michael frantically mashed the escape key, but it only made the error pulse brighter. It wasn't a bug. It was a digital eviction notice, served publicly to the entire tech world. The audio feed cut out abruptly, likely pulled by a panicked sound engineer, but the video remained live. I watched my father shove Michael aside, his face contorted in a scream I couldn't hear. He pointed a trembling finger at the camera, as if he could see me through the lens. He knew. My pocket began to vibrate against my leg. It was a buzzing threat. I looked down at the screen. Dad's ringtone played like a grenade waiting to detonate. I met Agent Miller in the parking lot of a derelict Blockbuster 2 miles from the estate. The heat radiating off the asphalt distorted the air, making him look like a shimmering mirage. He handed me a small lapel pin, heavy and cold. "It's a wire," Miller said, his eyes scanning the horizon for any tail. "We have the bank transfers, but we need intent. Get them to admit they knew the IP wasn't theirs to sell." I pinned it under my collar. It felt like a target. The iron gates of the Vance estate groaned open, a sound that used to make me feel safe. Now, it sounded exactly like a prison cell closing. I drove past the manicured hedges and the marble fountain where Michael and I used to race toy boats. He always sank mine. I parked next to Dad's Bentley, which was parked crookedly, a rare sign of his unraveling composure. The front door was already open. They were waiting for me inside like vultures sensing a dying animal. Mom was pacing the marble foyer, clutching a lace handkerchief that looked perfectly dry. When she saw me, she launched into a performance worthy of an Academy Award. "Donald," she wept, reaching for my hands but stopping short when I didn't recoil. "How could you humiliate us? The investors are furious." She wiped a non-existent tear from her cheek. "We did this for the family legacy. We wanted to build something that would last for you boys." Her voice trembled with practiced fragility. It was almost convincing. My father didn't bother with tears or theatrics. He marched out of the library, his face a map of broken veins and fury. "You think this is funny?" he roared, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling. "I've already called the lawyers. We'll sue you for corporate sabotage, breach of contract, and malice." He jabbed a callous finger into my chest. "I will bury you under so much litigation you'll be paying us until you die." I didn't flinch. I just tapped the lapel pin. I stepped back, removing his finger from my sternum. "You can't sue an employee you already terminated for not doing a job he no longer has," I said quietly. "The system locked down because there was no licensed administrator. You fired the only person with the biometric clearance to operate the Chimera Protocol." I looked at Michael, who was sulking by the liquor cabinet. You handed the keys to a guy who can't even drive. The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating. Michael slammed his glass onto the sidebar, shattering the crystal. It doesn't matter, he screamed, his face flushed with scotch and panic. We promised Omnicorp full IP ownership. We signed the warranty clauses, Donald. If you don't unlock it, they'll know we lied about the title transfer. He froze, realizing what he had just said. Dad closed his eyes, a look of pure defeat washing over him. The wire on my collar felt suddenly warm against my skin. They had just confessed. I looked at my family, these strangers who shared my last name. They were terrified, not of losing me, but of losing the money. I needed to get into the server room to finish this properly. Fine. I lied, letting my shoulders slump as if defeated. I'll unlock it. But I need Michael to verify the admin transfer physically. Mom exhaled, a sound of relief that made me sick. They thought I was surrendering. I was just checking the blast radius. The drive back to the headquarters was suffocating. My father sat in the passenger seat, gripping the door handle like he was bracing for a crash. Michael and Mom followed in the Bentley, a funeral procession for their own reputation. We bypassed the lobby, swiping into the secure elevator that led directly to the basement server farm. The air down here was recycled and cold, smelling faintly of ozone and dust. I watched the floor indicator change. They thought they were ascending back to power. They were actually digging their own graves. The heavy steel doors hissed open. Inside the control room, the wall of monitors was still flashing red with the license violation. Error. A video feed in the corner showed the Omnicorp boardroom. The lead buyer, a man named Sterling with eyes like flint, leaned into his microphone. We're losing patience, Edward, he said, his voice tinny through the speakers. Fix this now, or the deal is void. My father straightened his tie, forcing a smile. Just a technical formality, he promised. Donald is handling it. I pulled a single sheet of paper from my laptop bag. It was standard legal boilerplate. Or at least it looked that way to people who didn't read the fine print. I'll authorize the handshake, I said, keeping my voice flat. But I need Michael to sign this. It acknowledges that I wrote the original code structure, just for my resume. If I am leaving with nothing, I at least want the credit. Michael snatched the paper, barely glancing at the text. He was too eager to win. Pathetic, Michael muttered, uncapping a gold fountain pen. You always were desperate for a gold star, weren't you? He scribbled his signature aggressively at the bottom, tearing the paper slightly. He didn't realize that in the world of liability law, acknowledging authorship of the code also meant accepting responsibility for its fraudulent sale. By signing that paper, he wasn't just insulting me. He was legally certifying that he knew exactly what he was stealing. He tossed the pen onto the desk. Happy now? Fix it. I picked up the document and slid it into my bag, right next to the recording device. Let's go, I said. Slept. I led Michael toward the inner glass cage where the mainframes lived. The cooling fans roared like jet engines. A deafening, white noise that swallowed all conversation. It was my sanctuary, a place of pure logic where emotions couldn't survive. Michael shivered in his thin designer suit. He looked small against the towering racks of black servers. He didn't belong here. Put your hand on the panel, Michael commanded, trying to shout over the fans. I approached the central console. The biometric scanner pulsed with a waiting amber light. This was the moment. Once I authenticated, the system would grant full root access. My father and mother watched through the glass partition, their faces pressed against the pane like children at a zoo. They looked hungry. I raised my hand, hovering my thumb over the glass plate. I could feel the static electricity in the air. I pressed my thumb down. The scanner beeped a cheerful acceptance tone. The red error screens blinked off, replaced by the calming blue of the command prompt. Michael laughed. A triumphant bark. Finally, he yelled, reaching for the keyboard to push me aside. But he stopped. The screen didn't display the admin dashboard he expected. It showed a single, blinking query. Einheit IP repetier idion. Michael squinted at the glowing text. Repatriation? He asked, confused. What does that mean? I smiled. It means going home. Michael froze, his hand hovering over the dashboard. Repatriation? He asked, his voice trembling with a sudden dawning horror. I didn't answer him. I typed the final command sequence. Execute Chimera Protocol. The screen shifted instantly from the calm blue to a menacing, pulsing amber. It wasn't a shutdown sequence. It was a digital vacuum. The code wasn't just locking itself down. It was leaving. Data packets began streaming off the local drive, routed directly to my private encrypted cloud storage. Michael lunged for the keyboard, his fingernails scratching the plastic keys. But I blocked him with a stiff shoulder. It's too late, I said calmly. The genie is leaving the bottle forever. The servers around us began to spin down, their cooling fans dropping from a deafening roar to a dying whine. It sounded like a jet engine failing mid-flight. Michael struck my chest, a weak, flailing hit born of panic rather than strength. Stop it! He screamed, his voice cracking. You are deleting $2 billion! Through the soundproof glass, I saw my father's face contort into something unrecognizable. He didn't need to hear the words to know the asset was vaporizing. He slammed his fist against the reinforced glass, the heavy thud barely audible over the screaming system alerts. The door to the server cage beeped and flew open. Dad stormed in, dragging the smell of expensive cologne and fear with him. He didn't look like a CEO anymore. He looked like a brawler in a suit. He shoved Michael aside, nearly knocking him into a server rack, and grabbed my collar. Cancel it, he roared, spitting flecks of saliva onto my face. Turn it back on right now, or I swear to God I will kill you. His hands shook violently, vibrating against my neck. I looked him in the eye. You can't kill a ghost. I reached past his tightening grip and pressed the final confirmation key. The amber light on the screen flared once, blindingly bright, and then vanished. The monitors went black. Then, a single line of white text appeared: SYSTM PARG. ASES secured. Local derive EMPTY. The silence that followed was absolute. The fans had stopped. The hard drives had ceased their rhythmic clicking. It was the silence of a heart that had stopped beating. Dad released my collar, stumbling back as if the text on the screen had physically pushed him. The empire was now just expensive metal boxes. Mom entered the cage slowly, her heels clicking on the raised floor tiles. She looked at the blank screens, then at me, her eyes searching for a trick. Donald, she whispered, her voice trembling. What did you do? Where is the product? Michael was on the floor, weeping into his hands. He stole it. Michael sobbed, pointing a shaking finger at me. He took it all. I corrected him. I didn't steal anything. I just packed up my personal belongings. You fired me, remember? I took what was mine and I am leaving. The only light remaining in the room came from the video conference screen in the corner. Sterling, the lead buyer from Omnicorp, was still watching. He hadn't disconnected. He wasn't yelling. He was adjusting his glasses, looking strangely calm for a man who had just lost a fortune. "Edward," Sterling said, his voice cutting through the family drama. "I think we're done here." Dad spun around to the camera, his face a mask of desperation. "Mr. Sterling, wait! It's sabotage! We can sue him! We can recover the data! Just give us 10 minutes!" Sterling shook his head slowly. "I am not Mr. Sterling from Omnicorp," he said. "My name is District Attorney Reynolds." My father froze, his mouth hanging open. On the screen, the man removed his earpiece. "And this wasn't a merger negotiation, Edward. It was a sting operation." My mother let out a strangled gasp. "Slept. We've been working with Agent Miller for 6 months." Reynolds continued. "We needed you to attempt the sale of the IP to prove the fraud charges. The transfer attempt you just made. That was the final piece of evidence we required." The blood drained from Michael's face, leaving him looking like a wax figure. He looked at the paper I had made him sign, the one acknowledging my authorship, which was now effectively a confession that he knowingly tried to sell stolen goods. "But the money?" Dad stammered, his mind unable to process the shift. "The $2 billion. Reynolds chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "There was never any money. Omnicorp doesn't exist, Edward. You've been negotiating with the state of New York." The realization hit my father like a physical blow to the gut. I picked up my laptop bag, feeling lighter than I had in years. The elevator doors dinged in the hallway, followed by the heavy, synchronized footsteps of a tactical team. My family stood frozen in the wreckage of their greed, trapped in a glass cage of their own making. I looked at my father one last time. He wasn't a titan of industry anymore. He was just an old man scared of the dark. "I am going now," I said softly. I walked past the dead servers, leaving them to the silence and the law. I stepped out of the elevator into the lobby. The silence of the server room, replaced by the heavy, rhythmic thud of combat boots. Agent Miller was no longer the quiet auditor in the corner. He stood by the revolving doors, wearing a tactical vest over his cheap suit, directing a stream of uniformed agents toward the elevators. The illusion of the Vance Empire was dissolving in real time. "It's done," I told him, my voice sounding hollow in the cavernous space. Miller nodded, his expression grim but satisfied. "We have the confession on tape," he said. "And the signature." The elevator doors chimed behind me, opening to reveal the wreckage of my family being escorted by federal agents. My father came out first, his hands cuffed behind his back, his immaculate suit jacket hanging off one shoulder. He wasn't walking with dignity, he was being dragged. When he saw me standing next to Miller, the confusion in his eyes hardened into pure, distilled hatred. He lunged forward, snapping the head of the agent holding his arm back. "You trained her," he screamed, his voice cracking. "You set us up! You destroyed this family!" Two agents slammed my father against the marble reception desk, the impact echoing like a gunshot. His cheek pressed against the cold stone, distorting his face into a grotesque mask of rage. "I gave you everything?" he sputtered, spit flying onto the polished floor. "I put a roof over your head? I made you?" I looked down at him, feeling a strange absence of fear. The monster who had controlled my life for 3 decades was just an old man with bad knees and no leverage. "You didn't make me," I said quietly. "You just employed me." Michael followed, weeping openly. The bravado of the golden child had evaporated, leaving behind a terrified boy who had never been told no. He wasn't fighting the agents, he was leaning on them, his legs unable to support the weight of his reality. "Donald, please," he blubbered, snot running down his face. Tell them it was a mistake. Tell them I didn't know. He looked at me with pleading eyes, expecting the safety net I had always provided. I thought about the gambling debts and the insults. I thought about the mechanic comment. Agent Miller looked at me, raising an eyebrow. Mr. Vance, do you want to make a statement regarding your brother's involvement? Did he understand the technical limitations? It was an out. I could say Michael was just a puppet, too stupid to understand the fraud. It might cut his sentence in half. I looked at Michael, at the selflessness etched into his features even now. He didn't want forgiveness, he wanted an escape route. He knew. I said, my voice steady. He signed a liability release. He claimed full ownership. He knew exactly what he was selling. My mother walked out last, flanked by a female officer. She wasn't crying. Her face was composed, her mind clearly racing through legal contingencies. She stopped in front of me, forcing the officer to pause. Donald, she said, her voice dropping to that conspiratorial whisper she used to hide family secrets. The safety deposit box in the Cayman account. The key is in my purse. She tried to nudge her handbag toward me with her shoulder. Protect the assets, Donald. For the family. When this blows over, we'll need that capital to rebuild. The officer confiscated the purse immediately, but a single brass key slipped out and clattered onto the floor. It spun on the marble, a golden dizzying circle, before coming to rest at the toe of my sneaker. It was the legacy they actually cared about. Not me. Not Michael. Just the hoard. Mom looked at the key, then up at me, her eyes commanding me to pick it up. To become an accomplice. To hide the loot. I looked at the key, then stepped over it. I don't need your money, I said. I have a job. I pushed through the revolving doors. The cool air of the city hitting my face like a baptism. The sun was setting, painting the skyscrapers in shades of orange and violet. Behind me, the chaotic noise of the lobby, the shouting, the radio chatter, the weeping, began to fade. I walked toward my car. A 10-year-old sedan that suddenly felt like a chariot. I didn't look back at the glass facade of the building. I didn't need to see them being loaded into the black SUVs. I knew exactly how that movie ended. I sat in the driver's seat and closed the door, sealing out the world. The silence was profound. For the first time in my life, there was no looming deadline, no screaming parent, no crisis to manage. My phone sat on the passenger seat, silent. No one was calling to demand a fix. The severed connection felt physical, like a phantom limb that had stopped aching. I looked at my hands on the wheel. They were steady. They were mine. I wasn't the pedestal anymore. Slept. I was just the man who drove the car. As I put the car in gear, a final siren wailed in the distance, approaching the building to clean up the mess. It was a mournful sound, marking the death of a dynasty built on lies. I checked the rearview mirror one last time. I saw Agent Miller stepping out to address the press, the flashing lights reflecting off his glasses. My family was gone. Slept. Processed into the justice system they thought they were above. The sound of the handcuffs clicking was the first time my family had ever been truly honest with each other. 6 months later, the coffee in my mug was cheap, but it tasted like freedom. I sat in a converted warehouse in Brooklyn, the exposed brick walls covered in whiteboards. On the muted television in the corner, a familiar face flashed across the news ticker. The tech fraud family. The Chiron read in bold red letters. The anchor described the sentencing hearing that concluded this morning. My father got 15 years for wire fraud. Michael got 8. My mother was still fighting the asset seizure. It felt like watching a documentary about strangers. Donald, Can you check the latency on the new patch? Sarah asked, rolling her chair over to my desk. She didn't ask me to fix her mistakes. She asked for my opinion. This was Chimera 2.0. A project built on transparency rather than secrets. There were no billion-dollar buyouts looming over our heads. We were just 5 engineers, trying to make medical data transfer safer. Sarah pointed to the screen, highlighting a block of code I had written that morning. It's elegant, she said. No back doors this time. The mail arrived with a heavy thud on the communal table near the entrance. On top of the stack sat a plain white envelope, with a prison stamp in the corner. The handwriting was jagged and hurried. Unmistakably Michael's. I picked it up, feeling the weight of the desperate words. Inside. He probably wanted money for the commissary, or a character reference for an appeal. He still thought our relationship was transactional. He still believed he could push a button, and I would dispense a solution. I held it up to the light. I didn't open it. I didn't need to know his excuses or his pleas. That part of my life, the part that craved their validation, had died in the server room 6 months ago. I walked over to the industrial shredder by the copy machine. The blades whirred to life, hungry and loud. I fed the envelope into the slot, watching the white paper turn into confetti. It was a small sound, but it felt like a final gavel strike. I wasn't his brother anymore. I was just a stranger. I returned to my desk and opened the public repository on my third monitor. The download counter was ticking upward steadily, 10,000 unique users. When the dust settled, people asked who I had sold the code to. They assumed I was holding out for a better offer than Omnicorp. They were wrong. I didn't sell Chimera to anyone. I cleaned it, stripped out the proprietary hooks, and released it as open-source software. It belonged to the world now. No one could ever lock it in a cage again. Sarah tapped me on the shoulder again, holding up a fresh pot of coffee. We're ordering lunch, she said. Thai or pizza? It was a mundane question, completely devoid of drama or manipulation. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever heard. I looked at the code scrolling on my screen, lines of logic that were saving lives instead of building fortunes. I smiled, realizing I finally had the one thing my father could never buy. I wasn't a son looking for approval anymore. I was just the guy who owned the code.